Snow had drifted high against the blackened ribs of the burned-out wagon, wind whistling through its skeletal frame like a hymn sung by the dead. And there she stood, barefoot, stiff with cold, a little girl no older than 7, her arms hanging loose, her eyes too old, too still, a ragged doll dangled from her fingers. Its yarn hair froze into the fabric of her dress. Her dress, once calico, was singed at the hem, black in places like it had touched fire. But it wasn't the doll or the burn marks that stopped him. It was the sign. A crude scrap of pine hung from her neck with twine, letters carved rough and deep. Retourne to sender. It reined in his horse slowly, boots crunching as he dismounted. The gelding shifted behind him, snorting at the scent of ash and fear. She didn't flinch, just stared, wide-eyed and silent. The way feral things go still when they don't know if the hand reaching for them is kind. He removed his hat, letting snow settle on dark hair already straw with silver. Lines tugged the corners of his eyes. The kind grief carves in silence over years, not days. You alone out here? He asked, voice low. She blinked. Once the wind stole his breath, not from cold, but from the way she finally moved, lifting the doll and pressing it to her cheek like it could answer for her. Her lips moved. A whisper cracked like river ice. Are you the cowboy Mama spoke of? His jaw clenched. He hadn't been anyone's anything in a long time. She looked past him like she was trying to see through years. She said, if I waited, the one who finds the forgotten would come. He said nothing. Words felt like sins too big to speak. Instead, he crouched, unbuttoned his heavy coat, and opened it like a tent. She didn't run, didn't ask. She just stepped forward and let herself be gathered. Her body was brittle as fence wood left too long in frost. It could feel every rib through her dress. Her skin was fever-worn despite the chill. She didn't cry. Children who cry still believe someone's coming. He lifted her gently and mounted with her wrap tied to his chest. Her doll got tucked into the coat beside her like a sibling. As the gelding turned, the wind caught the wooden sign she'd worn, tore it loose, and sent it spinning end over end down the white trail. It didn't go after it. Lit the name they gave her rod where it landed. They rode westward, the trail curving along the snowy ridge with nothing but the hiss of wind and the muffled thud of hooves for company. Now and then she would stir slightly, not from fear, just to make sure he was still there. He didn't speak, didn't offer food. Not yet. The mountain didn't ask for words either. It stretched around them in silence, pine trees bowing under wide weight, the sky low and pierced like the world had stopped breathing. By the time the cabin came into view, half hidden by a slope of rocks and wind-warped trees, her body had gone slack in his arms. He pushed the door open with his boot. The hinges groaned inside. It was stale but dry. A hearth, a cot, a table, dust, and something deeper, a loneliness that had settled into the wood. He laid her on the cot. She stirred then, curled instinctively toward the wall. He knelt to build a fire. Flame took slowly, swallowing the kindling with a soft hiss. He didn't look at her as he worked. Not when he lit the oil lamp. Not when he pulled the pot from the shelf and ladled snow into it to melt. Only when he placed a tin cup near the hearth too warm did she sit. Ah! Her hands shook. Not from cold now, but from something else. The kind of shaking that comes from being held together too long. He didn't ask what happened. Instead, he brought her the cup, kneeling so they were a level. She didn't reach for it. But when he set it beside her and stood, she waited until he turned away, then drank like she didn't trust her luck to last. The doll sat beside her. She tucked its legs under the quilt like it might need warmth, though. It didn't sleep, used. Watched the shadows stretch and twitch as the fire settled into embers. Outside, the storm passed. At dawn, her voice came again. Mama said he'd have eyes like the storm and hands that could build or break. He didn't answer. It couldn't. His hands had done both. She pointed to a small shelf. Is that your daughter's drawing? He looked, then froze. They thought he burned it. A child's charcoal sketch on yellowed paper. A horse, a man, a cabin, a girl between them, smiling wide. The last. Thing his own child ever gave him before she drowned while he was gone digging fence posts that never got finished. He took it from the shelf, held it in his calloused palm. "No," he said softly. "That's yours now." She looked at him like she didn't believe people could just give things like that away. Maybe they couldn't. He left the cabin later that day, heading down into the town to get flour, salt, and whatever else she might take to eating. He didn't ask what she liked. He just tried to remember what his daughter once did. He rode back with bread wrapped in cloth and a tin of jam that cost too much. She sat by the window. When he returned, her knees to her chest, the rag doll in her lap, a stick in her hand. She had drawn on the fog glass a circle with 3 dots inside. He stopped in the doorway. She didn't turn, just said, "That's home." He set the bread beside her, the jam too. "You said nothing when I asked," she whispered. He took off his coat, hanging it by the fire. "You asked if I was the cowboy your mama spoke of." He said at last. Silence stretched like dusk between them. "You don't know if I am," he finished. "But I came." She looked at the stick in her hand, then back to the window. "Sometimes coming is enough," she whispered. He looked down at his boots. Snow melting in slow tears. But she wasn't finished. She stood, walked to the hearth, and drew in the soft ash. A line, a dot, a second dot beside it. Then a third. She tapped one of the dots. "You," she said. Then another "me." Then the third, "Mama." His throat thickened. The air inside the cabin seemed too still to breathe. Before he could reply, the sound came. A rustle outside, then a hard knock at the door. Not the kind neighbors give. The kind folks give when they want something they think belongs to them. She stiffened, stepping behind him without needing to be told. He didn't reach for a rifle. Not yet. Just stepped to the door and opened it slow. 3 men stood outside, dusty, drunken-looking. 2 of them young, 1 older. 1 held a rope. 1 had a piece of paper. "Evening, cowboy," the older one said, eye squinting. "We come to collect what's ours." The man didn't blink. "You lost something?" The drunk grinned. "Not lost. Solve. We left her with a sign and everything." He stepped forward, boots cracking over ice. "She's got no claim here." The cowboy said nothing. Just stepped forward until he blocked their view. Inside, the rope in the man's hand dangled. She was meant to settle a debt. "She ain't your debt to settle," the cowboy said, voice a rasp. One of the younger men spat in the snow. "I ain't your kid either." The cowboy didn't argue. Just shut the door. Locked it. Turned back to find her staring at him. Not in fear, not in panic, but something worse. Expectation. As if she'd seen this play out before, as if she already knew how it ended. He knelt beside her. "You're not going back." She shook her head slowly. "He'll come again." He nodded, and in the silence between them, the fire cracked. From the ashes on the floor, the wind carried her soot drawing upward in a swirl. 3 dots, 1 line, and a girl finally choosing to stay. The next morning brought pale light through the warped glass of the cabin window. The girl sat cross-legged on the cot, her doll in her lap, watching him with the quiet of someone who'd learned the world doesn't respond kindly to noise. He moved through the room with the steadiness of habit, laying logs on the fire, filling the kettle for melted snow, rinsing out 2 chipped tin cups. Not once did her gaze drift. She hadn't spoken since the knock. Neither had he. Words in the right mouths could wound deeper than bullets. He'd learned that too late to help the girl he'd lost. But maybe not too late for this one. She took the bread he gave her, tearing it into precise quarters before eating one, then hiding the rest under the pillow. He didn't comment. Hunger had a long memory, so did abandonment. When she finished, she stood without being asked. And went to the hearth. Her bare feet made no sound on the splintered floorboards. She reached into the ash and began drawing again, slow and deliberate. Today she made 3 lines radiating out from a single point like the rays of a sun that didn't rise. A said nothing, just stirred the pot and counted how many days it would take to gain her trust. That afternoon he brought in a bundle of wood from the lean-to. She followed him outside without a word. Her arms wrapped around herself though the air was mild. The wind tugged. Her dress like it wanted to carry her off. I saw her glance at the axe by the stump, not in fear, just recognition. She was too young to know how to swing it, but not too young to have seen it used. I stacked the logs by the door. She stooped beside him, picking up the kindling he dropped. I let her help. Let her hands learn the shape of work, not just the weight of survival. They didn't speak, but they didn't need to. That night, as he cleaned the fish he'd caught at dawn, she brought over a chipped bowl filled with dry beans she'd found in a sack beneath the sink. She offered them to him, the way a bird might offer twigs for a nest it hopes someone will stay in. He nodded once, took the bowl, and added them to the pot. She sat by the fire, humming beneath her breath. A tune with no words, no real melody, but enough rhythm to keep ghosts from growing too loud. I remembered that sound his daughter used to hum the same way when storms passed over and she was too proud to admit fear. Latir he carved while she slept. His pocket knife steady, each stroke careful as prayer. He worked by firelight, shaving soft pine into the shape of a horse. Not perfect, not beautiful, but gentle in posture, hairs tilted forward like it listened. I set it on the sill before dawn. When she woke, she saw it, but didn't touch it. Used stared at it for a long while before turning away. I understood. Trust didn't come with gifts. It came with silence held long enough to mean something. By midday, she began moving differently. Not speaking, not smiling, but lingering longer in the same room as him, watching his hands as he stitched a torn blanket, tilting her head when he sharpened a blade. Children watched who they might one day forgive. In town, the gossip had begun. I heard it while trading pelts for lamp oil and flour. Two women near the general store whispering too loud not to be overheard. Some say he took her from the trail. Used found her there. She ain't his blood. Men like him don't change overnight. You mark me. I walked past them without glancing their way. The bag of flowers slung over his shoulder. They heard worse once. Much worse. Back at the cabin, he paused at the threshold. She was drawing again. This time with a coal stub on the inside of the hearthstones. 3 figures again. 2 tall, 1 small. The smallest one held something that looked like the wooden horse. She didn't hide the drawing when he entered. That night he took out the locket. He hadn't opened it in years. The clasp still stuck on one side. Inside was a curl of golden hair and the tiniest sketch. His daughter laughing with squinted eyes. He left it on the table when he went to wash up. When he returned, the locket was closed again, and the girl was curled beneath the quilt, pretending not to have moved. He didn't speak of it. So many things were better left unspoken. The next morning he found the wooden horse missing from the sill. He smiled once to himself. Didn't want to chop wood, but the wind shifted that day, brought with it a crackle of tension he hadn't felt since his younger years when blood debts were settled in silence and men carved justice from wood and gunmetal. When he returned that evening, something was wrong. The door hung slightly ajar. His heart jumped. Inside the cabin was still the quilt folded. The girl gone. He stepped outside, his breath already misting fast. Footprints small bare. He followed them across the yard, past the broken fence into the woods. They led him to the widow's cabin down the ridge. Eres, Langry, who made pies for the church and warnings for the sheriff. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed. She came herself. The widow said before he could ask. Said she wasn't safe with a stranger. He looked past her. The girl was sitting on a stool by the fire, knees pulled up, staring into the flames. She wasn't scared, the widow added, but she was trembling. He nodded, stepping back without a word. I'll send her back once she's calm. The widow called after him. He didn't answer. The cabin felt colder when he returned. Not because the fire had died, but because something had shifted, a trust undone. He sat in the chair by the hearth, carving again, slower this time. His hand bled once from a slip of the blade, but he didn't stop. When the door opened a few hours later, it was silent. She stood there coatless, shoes untied, doll clutched like a lifeline. He didn't rise. She stepped forward and laid something on the table beside him. The wooden horse. Its legs have been snapped.